So we've had some pretty crazy weather this week here in the western suburbs, from tornadoes earlier in this week. Right now, as we record this interview, it is 60 degrees outside, and then we have some winter weather as a possibility. So we wanted to get to the bottom of it here. On the phone with me is Bill Snyder, who's a weather producer up at WGN-TV, who's been there for a number of decades. Bill, I appreciate your time today. Happy first day of meteorological spring.
Yes, Nick, how are you? Good to talk to you, and happy meteorological spring to you, and of course to all our viewers out there. Yeah,
thank you very much. So before we get into what's coming up, let's talk about what the heck happened earlier this week, because we had a couple tornadoes. We had one in Joliet out on the west side in the Kendall County portion. We had one in Naperville. So my question is, how did that happen? Because we don't see too many tornadoes in the month of February. I know it's not completely unheard of, but what the heck went on earlier this week in your mind?
You know what, Nick? It was a perfect situation where we had the atmosphere in general here around Chicago area has been a warm one. We're coming off the 14th warmest climatological winter on record, and our records date back to 152 years. So we've had this persistent mild pattern, this warm pattern, especially areas, to our south have really been extraordinarily warm. So we had a perfect situation where there was, a warm front just to the south, and that you had a situation where the winds were converging. You had easterly winds at the surface up here, and you had southerly winds. So what happens is we call that in meteorology directional shear. Mm-hmm. And when you have winds changing direction with height, that spins up enough shear into the atmosphere, which enables these little cells or showers or thunderstorms to be able to spin. And that's what happened. Now, this was not your typical or conventional tornado setup that we see, in our prime time during our tornado season, which occurs, in April, May, and even into June, where you really have some formidable setups where, the situation can turn quite deadly, as a matter of fact. This was not a situation meteorologically where, we were going to, expect an EF3 and EF4, a damaging tornado. But that being said, you can't dismiss it. A tornado is a tornado, whether it's an F0, it still produces some gusty winds. They don't typically last long. They spin up and then, last for a few seconds, and then they go right back into the clouds. So that's kind of what we were looking at on Monday. We didn't have, the true instability that we look for during, springtime tornadoes, where you've got the sun to pop out, and then you've got a front knocking on our doorstep, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is what sends alarm bells in weather forecasters' heads, because that's the type of situation where you can get these really strong and powerful tornadoes. This wasn't the case on Monday, but again, we had just enough enough spin into the atmosphere that produced these very brief weak F0 tornadoes. And couple of stats on that, Nick.
Yeah.
As you said, it doesn't happen very often. Well, you are 100% correct. If our tornado records go back to 1950, at least that are archived. And what's interesting, this was the first February tornado to impact our immediate viewing area, or we call it the CWA. It's a countywide area that the National Weather Service forecasts for. That's the first one since February 28th of 2017. But what's interesting about that is going all the way back to 1950, there have only been, prior to Monday, there have only been 8 tornadoes documented in the Chicago area. Wow. And guess what? 7 of those occurred on that infamous February 28th, 2017 outbreak. That came at the very tail end of a long stretch of abnormally warm weather that we had that February, where we were looking at multiple 70-degree days, 60-degree days. So the atmosphere was supercharged and juicy when those occurred. But so we've had only 8, and the other one being February 16th, 2006 in Iroquois County, which is just south of Kankakee County. So, this is really rare. We don't typically expect tornadoes in February. It's not totally unprecedented, but it can certainly happen.
And I think that's got to be why. Well, at least it caught me by surprise, and I know we didn't really have a watch or a warning.
We did not. We did not. No, there was not. There was no tornado watch issued. There was, there was an outlook, and the Storm Prediction Center also, in addition to issuing their outlooks where they have a marginal risk, a slight risk, and they go all the way up to moderate and high. They do also categorize the potential for tornadoes, and there was a 2% chance of an isolated tornado occurring in that risk area. So the risk wasn't zero, but it was extremely low.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the National Weather Service was as surprised as everybody else here then?
I don't necessarily think so, because anytime where you have at least some parameters in the atmosphere capable of producing, that type of setup that occurred on Monday, you certainly watch it closely. But, the fact is that usually the National Weather Service, actually the Storm Prediction Center, because they, in addition to putting the risk areas out, they issue when the severe thunderstorm watch and tornado watches, that kind of thing. And typically they only issue those watches, Nick, unless if they're expecting more than just an isolated incident,
Sure.
and this was isolated. And the other thing is, these things were moving very quickly. So we weren't expecting a long duration scenario. Typically when you get a tornado watch issued, or even a severe thunderstorm watch, it encompasses a pretty long duration of time, usually 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. We weren't expecting that in this particular setup on Monday. It was one of those situations where it just happened to be a quick, fast moving band of showers. And when we had the parameters in place where you had these wind directions that were changing with height, you had easterly winds coming in from one direction and southwesterly winds coming from the other. It was just enough oomph into the atmosphere that was able to produce these isolated storm cells to spin, which is what happened.
And how do those types of tornadoes, just with the difference in the wind shear and the levels of the wind, differ from the supercell tornadoes that we get in the spring and summertime?
The big difference there, Nick, is the environment to which they occur in, and certainly your temperatures and your moisture levels. When those occurred on Monday, we had temperatures. In Naperville, I believe the temperature was in the upper 40s when that brief tornado spun up. Typically, when you get your strong, damaging tornadoes, we have, either upper 60, 70-degree temperatures. Without saying, it's a warmer atmosphere is more buoyant, and a more buoyant atmosphere is more energetic. And so then you're able to get these stronger storms to pop up. Monday's setup was just strictly done through the wind shear in the atmosphere. We did not have the instability. One of the other measures that we look at is CAPE when it comes to severe thunderstorms, and that's the convective available potential energy. That's what CAPE stands for. And those levels were exceptionally low. And you would expect that when you're talking about a 40 and 50-degree atmosphere. And we had cloud cover. It's not like if we would have had sunshine with temperatures warming into the 60s when this happened, it could have been a far different story. But the fact that the atmosphere itself was fairly tame, and it didn't allow this to escalate any further than it did.
Sure. And to me, and I'm trying to I like to come up with comparisons in my brain. So those summertime big tornadoes, there's a lot of complex weather physics going on there, but it seems like the ones that we had earlier this week were pretty simple. Two levels of winds going in different directions, almost like you're spinning the leader of pop and making the little tornado in there. Right.
Or even another comparison could be is the water in a bathtub. When the water spins like that in a bathtub, that's pretty much exactly what happened on Monday.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's a good indicator on how tornadoes can form in different ways. I don't think that's something people consider.
Yeah, no, I don't think people realize that. And I think the other the other misconception is that, oh, well, it's only 45 or 50 degrees, then we can't get a tornado. But the fact is that if you have enough wind shear in the atmosphere, which is what we did, I mean, that was a fairly strong low pressure system that was just to our west.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you have that in place, you certainly can't dismiss it. Again, it's not the type of setup that's going to produce deadly, destructive tornadoes. But, that being said, there was still some damage, localized, very localized where it happened, near that Joliet Plainfield area, as you mentioned there. And then of course, some isolated damage in Naperville where the other one occurred. So, yeah, it can certainly happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I fancy myself being pretty prepared for that kind of thing. I keep my finger on the pulse as much as I can, especially being on the air and on the radio. We try to notify our listeners, but I learned about it after the fact, and I was like mad at myself. I'm like, how didn't I see that coming? God.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know what? I was home. I'm a little bit east of where you guys are, and east of where the tornado is, but still in the western suburbs. And all of a sudden I hear this tornado siren going off.
Wow.
And it honestly, it kind of caught me by surprise because I wasn't totally expecting it either. And boom, I clicked on my phone right away, and I have the radar at my fingertips. That's the beauty of things today.
Isn't it nice?
To 20 or 30 years ago. We didn't have these devices that would inform us of when something was coming. And usually, for the most part, especially in your more typical setups or damaging setups, the lead time is tremendous. So people are able to prepare more carefully than what we used to be able to do. And some setups years ago that unfortunately took the lives of many back in Plainfield, and as you mentioned, Lamont and so forth.
I'm going to do a little pop quiz here. Is there a month of the year that Chicagoland hasn't seen a tornado? Have we got one December and January?
Ooh, you know what? You might have stumped me on that one, Nick, but I know this much. I think that we've had one occur in every month, and even in January, there has been. We had an outbreak that extended into southern Wisconsin back. I recall it was about 15 years ago, where we had an unusually mild 65-degree day in early January, and these storms exploded up near the Rockford Belvedere area and then extended north from there into southern Wisconsin. And so that would still technically be considered the Chicago National Weather Service's jurisdiction, still a little bit west of us. But so I think
we'll count it. We'll count
confidently, Nick, that we've had at least one tornado occur in every month of the year. I would say, February has been a very quiet month. I mean, we've obviously had the two that occurred on Monday, but as I mentioned before, really, when you look at it, it's only since 1950. This is only the third year. 2006, 2017, and now 2023. So the only 3 years going all the way back to 1950 where tornadoes occurred in February. It's just, it's typically snow. It's not tornadoes that we're watching in February. It's snow, and it's turned into a snowier month than anything else.
Well, even this entire winter, I feel like we've gotten off pretty easy. We've only had maybe one significant snow event. I think we've only had one or two significant cold snaps. It's really been easy. And now it's 60 degrees as we sit here and record this interview at 1:37 on Wednesday, March 1st. It's 60 degrees today. Is what's making it 60 degrees today the same type of pattern that's kept everything pretty mild this winter?
It is. And it's been, it's been the jet stream pattern too, Nick. I mean, we've for us to get cold, usually you have to have steering winds that come in straight out of Canada or some sort of warming or blocking pattern that brings the cold air far enough south. And, while we've had that, that same type of pattern that occurred around Christmas, it brought us the cold weather. Our pattern has been by and large, that of Pacific origin. So we've had this persistent west to east flow, which brings mild air off the Pacific Ocean and straight into the Midwest, into Chicago. With that being said, as far as like you mentioned about our snow, well, it's all about, if people asked me back in the fall, they thought, well, what kind of winter are we going to have? I said, well, we're having a La Nina, which is our third in a row. And a triple dip La Nina typically means wetter than normal precipitation for Chicago and much of the Midwest. But that being said, that doesn't guarantee it's going to be snow. And it's all going to depend on our storm track. And that's kind of been the case because what's interesting is if you look at a couple of Midwestern cities, well, we've been fairly, as you said, we've gotten off pretty easy. You go areas just to the northwest of us, Madison, Wisconsin's had upwards of 40 to 45 inches of snow so far this season. And if you go farther northwest of there, Minneapolis is now over 70 inches of snow. So again, it's all related to the storm track. And, if the storm track would have been more southerly and east of us, that would have put us closer to the action zone for snow. So instead, with a more westerly storm track, that's meant more of a liquid variety precipitation versus snow.
And I think you're getting into what makes snowstorms so incredibly difficult to predict here too.
Yes.
And I bring that up because we have some potential winter weather coming up a little bit later on this week. We're starting off our week with tornadoes. It's 60 degrees and beautiful today, and perhaps we have some snow in winter weather coming up. So what do you know? I know it may be even too early to even talk about it because, predicting these things even more than a day out is difficult.
Yeah, and what makes some of these later in the season snow situations more difficult to forecast, Nick, is because you've got the atmosphere is warmer. Our days have been lengthening steadily 2.5 minutes or so per day, and the sun's getting stronger, so it's higher in the sky, and so we're going to be this winter storm, and it is a potent winter storm. And I think that for parts of our area, Friday afternoon and Friday evening, the commute period is going to be very tricky. And because it's a situation where this snow is going to be very wet. It's going to be heavy, very, difficult to move, but it's falling in an atmosphere where the temperatures may actually be slightly above freezing for a good portion of the event. So with that being said, it may not accumulate initially, but when it snows heavy enough, even at 34, 35 degrees, it will stick. And I think that's the setup that we're looking at on Friday. Again, it could be a situation where we're looking at a large, accumulation disparity across the metro area. Parts of our area may, I think it's very possible that parts of our area wind up with more than 6 inches of snow on Friday. But again, it's very tricky when you've got these temperatures that are that close to freezing or even, a couple of degrees above freezing, because you'll get some melting and compacting as the snow falls initially. But I think that mid-afternoon period on Friday through the rush hour and even just beyond that, the snow rates during that period could be quite high. And, it really doesn't matter what the temperature is at that point, because that knocks down your visibility and it makes it difficult for road crews to try to keep up with that type of snow. So, if you got traffic on the roads and snow falling at a heavy rate, that's a recipe for a real nightmare commute on Friday.
And I imagine it's got to be really hard to figure out ahead of time where that rain snow line is going to be when you get temperatures up near freezing, because you can have one community south who gets maybe an inch but the same amount of moisture. They get just one gets it in rain, the other gets it in snow.
That much we're 100% sure of, it is that it's a very moisture laden system. And we've had several of these. We had the ice storm to our northwest suburbs a week ago today, and then of course we had the heavy rain event with the isolated tornadoes on Monday, and now here we are again with another precipitation system that's going to likely produce more than an inch of water across the area. And how that's distributed is still yet to be determined. But like I said, I think that it's a safe bet that parts of our area are going to see more than 6 inches of snow. But where exactly that lays out, it's still tricky, and we have time to refine the forecasts, and we will certainly be doing that here in the next 24 to 36 hours.
So, my headline for later on today is going to be Bill Snyder of WGN calls 6 inches of snow across Chicagoland. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that to you. I know that that's
what we like to do, Nick, is the Weather Prediction Center does a real nice job of they kind of highlight these probabilities on certain accumulation amounts. And so we look at that as a forecast tool because, we have so much available to us today, these different computer models. And so we're able to dissect and kind of come up with a cumulative average. And, and that's the best way to go, because if you get married to one specific computer model run, I mean, you make your head spin, and it just doesn't work that way. We have to kind of cumulatively average, and the best thing about an ensemble or an average is it tends to smooth out the extremes. You smooth out the lower end of the spectrum, and you also smooth out you eliminate the high end of what could fall. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be it's certainly. Spring in Chicago, and it's not totally without precedent. March can be a wild ride around here. I mean, we see everything from snowstorms to tornadoes to 70-degree temperatures. Yeah. So we kind of get the full gambit of weather, because you have what's essentially going on is you have two seasons that are battling it out. You've got the what's left of winter, and then you've got the building warmth to the south that's slowly advancing north with time. So as you get the two seasons that are clashing with one another and battling it out, you get these storms to develop. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it sure is. And with the difficulty in predicting what's going to go on, with this winter weather, there's always going to be someone who's going to be mad at you. I figure meteorologists are probably used to that. Some people being happy with you.
What's funny, Nick, is I if I had $1 for every time somebody said, "Oh, I wish I could be a meteorologist," 50% of the time and get paid, I would be a rich man and I'd be able to retire tomorrow. It's funny.
Hey, you know what? What is the one thing you wish people knew that they probably don't know about predicting the weather?
I mean, the thing I wish is that, they what they don't know is that, especially if we're talking about Chicago, is, we cover a large metropolitan area. So you're talking about two areas where the climate can be totally different. You've got Waukegan up north near the Wisconsin border versus Kankakee. It's almost like two different atmospheres in those areas. It's not easy. And then, the other factor is we've got Lake Michigan. We got a big body of water that's sitting right next to us. And Lake Michigan plays a huge role. Certainly in the spring it does, because it can impact your temperatures, it instantly. If you get any wind shift off the lake, I mean, you can drop the temperature 10, 15 degrees. And, our modeling has gotten so good. It's done such a tremendous job when it comes to forecasting, these events. But, the lake is it really throws a huge curveball when it comes to forecasting our weather. And it takes, weeks and if not months for that lake to warm up. And you can always, as out in your area, out in Aurora, I mean, there can be days where the temperature is 25 degree. We have a 25 degree difference from downtown Chicago to Aurora. Mm-hmm. And so when you're trying to, pinpoint exactly where that temperature disparity is going to lay out, I mean, it's a challenge. There's no question. Yep. It's a challenge, but I mean, we certainly do the best we can with the tools that we have available to us. And I will say that the tools that we do have available to us are tremendous. Mm-hmm. And it's just in the scope of the 25 years that I've been there, I marvel at what we have at our disposal, and it really helps to make better forecasts. And I think the forecast accuracy has gotten a lot better because of it.
Yep. It's pretty crazy, right? And I know that a lot of people are only worried about what's going on in their own backyard, sometimes literally. So
the thing, right?
You just got to know that when these meteorologists on TV are making these predictions, it's for the entire Chicagoland area. And you're talking about a 100-mile radius. So cut them some slack, people.
Right. And you know, and I mean we do, when there is going to be a difference, we do try to, you know, highlight and
Hmm.
specify, you know, what the difference is going to be across the area. And then, you know, when you see our temperatures or our 7-day forecast on TV, those numbers are valid for Chicago O'Hare. That's our
Hmm.
official station in Chicago. So when you see a 7-day forecast or you see numbers, those numbers are centered on Chicago O'Hare. You know, and usually we'll mention, you know, if it's going to be cooler by the lake, you know, we visualize that and let people know, because, you know, what might be 65 at O'Hare versus, you know, 52 at Navy Pier, people say, what happened to the 65? Well, usually we will certainly do our best to illustrate that and you know, make people aware of the large range in temperatures that are expected across the area on that given day.
For sure, man. Hey, Bill, I appreciate your time, and I know you're going to have a busy couple of days trying to figure out what's happening
Yes,
this week. So I'll let you go
sure.
and have a meeting of the minds with Tom and the rest of your gang. All right.